Today's theme is what's the plan for three Eastern Conference teams heading in different directions. The Knicks, the Nets, and the Bulls have different reasons to talk about their plan, and we'll get to all of it today on Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, everybody. Thanks for joining us here on Locked On NBA, where you can get the latest and greatest from around the association. And yes, you're not getting Jackson Gatlin today. I'm Tony East. I host Locked On Pacers, filling in for Jackson today. And we are talking about the league at large. Three Eastern Conference teams were playing. What's the plan? The Knicks. The plan is to be good. But what are they doing with the back of their roster and why they secretly might be setting up for a trade? The Nets, what is really the plan? They've got some good vets, and yet they're trying to stink. And the Bulls have Levine and Lonzo and Vucevic, and they're trying to trade them and maybe not be very good, but also those guys are good. What's going on here? We're going to figure it out with the hosts from those shows. Hayes from Locked On Bulls, Adam Armbrecht from Locked On Nets, and Gavin Schall from Locked On Knicks will join us all to talk about it. Thanks for making us your first listen here on Locked On NBA today. Your second listen could be any one of our wonderful NBA channels. I would recommend Locked On Cavs to hear more about Jared Allen and his 3-year, $90+ million extension. And today's show brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA. You'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Now let's talk the plan for the Knicks, the Bulls, and the Nets. Everybody, listen up. I got to tell you about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you are looking for. Plus, with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you will get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at prices you want, it is easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. What comes next for the Knicks? Not a confusing offseason at all. They got better. They extended Jalen Brunson. Their long-term future's bright. Their short-term future's bright. Everyone gets all that. And yet, my radar is up for the New York Knicks. And here to explain more about the Knicks and their situation is Gavin Schall from Locked On Knicks. Gavin, the Knicks just signed Precious Achiuwa and Chuma Okeke, and all of a sudden, they've got a nice little pile of tradable salaries that aren't in their rotation. Precious Achiuwa, obviously they needed him because they needed a backup center, but do you kind of feel like they're set up, as I do, to do some sort of Achiuwa and small salaries for a better player at the trade deadline swap, or am I going crazy about the Knicks and their back-end roster moves?
You are not going crazy. I said it right after they signed Achiuwa that this is not the final form of this team, or at least by Leon Rose's best intentions, this is not the final form of this team. Ideally, it would have been Isaiah Hartenstein, but they were going to need a better backup center than Precious Achiuwa. Mitchell Robinson is just too injury prone. He is not someone who is ever going to be playing 40 minutes in a playoff game. You need someone who ideally gives you a little bit more stylistic versatility, but also just if they're going to beat the Celtics, they just need a better player, period, in that spot.
So this is like a dreamy pie in the sky kind of thinking, but you cobbled together. They just picked Dadier late in the first round this year. They have Achiuwa's salary. They have Keita Bates-Diop's salary. They have this Wizards pick that will probably be a first at some point, or is it the Pistons one? Whatever. One of their
both. Yeah.
One of them will probably never be a first, but one will. Either way, if you're trading a guy who was just picked late in the first round and a first round pick, Achiuwa's okay, and you can get back a player who makes something like 12 to 15 million, that's a pretty attractive package. And I think people were right to say, oh, this is good. The Knicks got their backup center. Mitchell Robinson's hurt, like you just said. But I saw that move and the immediate reporting from Fred Katz and others that he waived his no trade clause and thought, oh, yeah, the Knicks clearly know that they're set up to make a deal. And the good thing about it, as we just ran through all the pieces that would, in theory, I don't know, but in theory be involved, it doesn't even touch their top 8 or 9. And that's why I thought it was so good that they were able to pull this off. I think the Knicks are set up pretty well for something like that in the next 6 or so months.
Yeah. And the fact is, it just has to happen, right? Because they're like, you're just not riding with Precious Achiuwa for 16 minutes in like an Eastern Conference final. And he was good for the Knicks, Tony. You saw it firsthand, partially, like super switchable defender, far and away the best rim running big that Jalen Brunson has played with. Like those two, like during the first stretch where both centers were out, like really created some magic. Like none of this is to diminish him. Like as a regular season player, like the Knicks could win 60 games this year with Precious Achiuwa as their backup center. I just don't think the playoff ceiling is high enough. And knowing Leon Rose, there was always a plan within a plan. Like you even maybe give more credit to Brock Aller, like the cap specialist in the Knicks front office. Like every salary has a purpose, and that purpose comes to fruition within time. Unlike so many Knicks teams of years past, there is a plan here.
I think it's going to be fascinating to see it all shake out because, like you said, everything they do makes so much sense, right? They got it all done with Bridges. They made the trade work with the Shake Milton. What is Shake Milton doing here? Kind of trade, and they, but all of a sudden, Isaiah Hartenstein leaves, and there's this hole at backup center, and they have very obvious stuff to improve that spot, or even their starting center spot, without touching any of Anunoby, Randle, Brunson, Bridges, Hart, Robinson, DiVincenzo, and McBride. That's crazy. That's very impressive. The Knicks are in a very good spot. But as you know, and as everyone listening knows, Tom Thibodeau plays centers, right? Like that was, Julius Randle was out, so it changed the dynamics a little bit. But in that Pacers-Knicks series, when they were getting banged up and they didn't have Mitchell Robinson, they had to play a five at all times, even behind Isaiah Hartenstein, and that led to some Jericho Sims sneaking in there, right? He just likes having a center. Their system requires it, and it works. That's not to say he's doing something dumb, but it does mean you have to have centers on the team. And so if Precious can't do it or they don't think he's good enough, they have now the resources, including Precious's salary, to actually do that. And I think that's very smart.
Yeah, I agree. Though I do hope they get to some small ball this year. I think it's pretty clear if they'd kept Hartenstein, I might not be pushing so hard in this direction, but I think the best lineup this team has, like if it came down to a game 7 against your Pacers, the aforementioned Celtics, the Bucks, the Sixers, a lot of great teams in the East, like closing minutes of that game with the way the roster is currently constructed, I would kind of hope that they would think about going small and throw OG Anunoby out there as your nominal 5 defensively, have Julius Randle as your nominal 5 offensively. And in doing so, you can get Dante DiVincenzo on the floor. You can get your best 5 on the floor, because right now their best lineup, which is something maybe we're going to talk about in just a sec, Tony, I think maybe doesn't feature Julius Randle, would be Brunson, DiVincenzo, Bridges, Anunoby, and Mitchell Robinson. So it's going to be interesting to see them try out different configurations. We did see in game 4 against the Sixers, they closed that game with Anunoby, with Achiuwa. Of course, Randle was injured at that point, but it looked pretty good. They held they held Joel Embiid in check, looked great offensively. They're going to have to find ways to maximize their spacing.
And you just nailed why that's so important that they close with OG at the 5. It's not they close with OG at the 5. They did it against Joel Embiid. If you can do it against him, you can do it against anybody, which leads to the conversation that's like lightly bubbling. It's not a real thing. It's just like people on the internet speculating, which is what we do. But it's like everyone's connecting the same dots. And that is, well, if they could play small, Julius Randle would make a lot more sense on the team, but they really don't all the time. And Jalen Brunson's going to have the ball a lot, and all the other guys in their team can kind of shoot and dribble a little bit. What does Julius Randle do here? And I think he is good. Julius Randle's really good. And as you saw in that Knicks Pacers series, and as I saw in the Knicks Pacers series, especially once Brunson got hurt, he couldn't play all 48 minutes. They needed a second ball handler at all, and Randle would have helped a ton, but not in the same ways at all. And when you have a ball-dominant beast like Brunson, his value is just different and not to the peak levels of Julius Randle. And so people have been talking about his impact, his talent level, his fit with this Knicks team. And if the answer was as simple as him being a small ball 5, like we just talked about, maybe that's easy. But if the answer is that he's not in their best 5, which I kind of agree with you, DiVincenzo, Hart, the 2 beast defensive wings and a center, is an incredible defensive 5 with Brunson that can score at will. What is this? What is this for Julius Randle? What is next for him? How does this shake out to you? I think there's going to be a lot of tinkering and experimenting, but when you're a good team, you don't have a lot of time to figure that kind of stuff out.
Yeah, it's so complicated, and I hate to keep driving this home, but it's made, I think, far more complicated by Hartenstein not being on this team, because Randle was just a much better player when he was paired with Hartenstein than when he was paired with Mitchell Robinson, even though both of them are nominally non-shooting centers for people who don't watch the Knicks every day, like I do. I know, Tony, you get to watch them a good amount. Like Hartenstein was just brilliant at finding ways to space despite not being a shooter, whether it was going to that like 5 to 10 foot flip shot, or even more importantly, just consistently working off the ball, setting these pin in screens, freeing the Knicks shooters, dribble handoffs. And it got to a point where he was such a threat doing stuff like that. And he could constantly make you pay if you didn't pay attention to him. You just had to go out in Hartenstein. And in turn, that opened up room for Randle to just have like kind of his best season is just like a pure force of nature bulldozer on the Knicks. And I think at the time he got hurt, even though he made 2 All-NBAs in 3 seasons, was probably playing his best ever ball in the Knicks. And just some of that stuff that he did so well is not going to be quite as accessible, or if it is as accessible, not going to be quite as efficient as it was with Hartenstein on the floor. So that's the first thing. But it is still such a conundrum because, to your point, they clearly need his shot creation. And even if you can argue, as I just mentioned, like, he might not be in their best interest, he might not be their best lineup. Like, at the end of the day, like, you just need a requisite amount of talent to win the East. You need a requisite amount of talent to win the NBA championship. And Julius Randle is by no small margin their second most talented offensive player. Could they falter when you have Brunson and Randle to attack defensively versus that Sixers series where the Knicks were able to have Brunson out? There's a lone weak defender, and that really helped them in some ways and maximize spacing around him. Like, there are all these questions, like like the pros and the cons are both so strong in so many directions that it makes you think, all right, how much do you really want to pay this guy if I can go through all those cons and say these are all very real issues? But at the end of the day, he played great with OG Anunoby, at least. Again, that was with Hartenstein, but that was like for that month they were all healthy. They played as well as any team played in any month in the regular season by net rating. So I think it's worth experimenting with. I think it is worth taking a full regular season to find out what it could look like with Julius Randle out there.
Yeah, and even he's so good. It's just the question is him doing his thing the most efficient offense the Knicks can have on a given possession with the shooting talent they have, with Jalen Brunson's ability to do anything at any time, basically, right? So if it's not the best, he shouldn't have the ball as much. But then what is Julius Randle without the ball as much? You know, Hartenstein, like you just covered, like if you can pass and hit floaters, like you're still providing spacing and value at the elbows, but Randle's not, he's okay at that stuff and he's not awesome at it. And then the other question is, the flip side of what I just said is, well, if Brunson's off the floor, like, are they really like, oh, DiVincenzo and Deuce McBride's enough ball handling? Like, no, that's probably not exciting either for 82 games. So it's a very interesting puzzle, muddied by a contract extension or trades, and they're running out of assets kind of, but like they're really good, so they don't even need it. It's really interesting. And the Knicks are going to be just endlessly fascinating to me for the next 12 to 18 months.
Me too, buddy. Me too.
What is your coming next on Locked On Knicks about this team?
This is a good preface for it. We're going to talk a lot about Julius Randle this week. He is now eligible for a contract extension that can be up to 4 years, $181.5 million. Will he take a Jalen Brunson-esque discount? Will he put off the decision for a year by taking his option in 25-26 with maybe an under the table deal? Not that the Knicks would ever do that, for a max contract after that. And allow the Knicks to spare a season not paying the luxury tax or excuse me, the second apron tax. So there's a lot to parse there, both on the court and off, and we're going to spend a lot of time covering that, Tony.
Where do the Knicks stand in the East? Can they make this small trade we described? What is up with Julius Randle? Locked On Knicks, Gavin Schall and Alex Wolf have more for that for you all.